Livy is one of the most renowned ancient historians, and his works are read as the primary sources when we want to understand what was happening, especially in ancient Rome, beginning maybe 750s, 760s, or 770s BCE to close to 0 AD. But it's important to point out that Livy was writing these stories about the history of Rome based on the accounts that he was getting from other sources. So it's important to have that in mind. Now, in this video, I'm going to look at what Livy tells us about Archimedes. Now, Archimedes is a very interesting character, and almost all of us have come across the name Archimedes, or we've done some maths in school that we are told it was originally discovered or invented by Archimedes. Now, Archimedes, we are told, was a guy who was very obsessed with mathematics and physics. And we are often told that he was always busy writing notes and sketching, and he would do this on any surface that was available to him, including the ground outside his house or in the streets of Syracuse where he lived, including his own skin on the drawing on his hands or thighs, on legs. So this guy was very much obsessed with maths and physics. And we are told that when he focused on these theories or in these exercises of trying to understand maths and physics and things like that, he seemed to lose touch with what was happening around him most of the time. Or many times that will happen. In fact, we are told that sometimes he would even forget to eat because he was so much lost into the science, maths and physics in particular, and trying to understand concepts and theories and trying to figure out things around him, which is of course interesting, because then he will get lost and he will not be aware of his surroundings. Now, out of this obsession with maths and physics, so many inventions and discoveries came out. Some to date remain to be very critical in the understanding of physics and maths. But this obsession with maths and physics and the lack of situational awareness also led him to being killed by someone, in fact, who did not intend to kill him. If Archimedes had been aware of his surrounding, he would likely not have been killed in the way he was killed, and we are coming to that shortly. Now, I welcome you to my YouTube channel, and in this channel I explore ancient texts, and the ancient texts I explore are those texts that have been around for thousands of years. At the moment, I'm reading from The Founding of the City by Titus Livius or Livy. This is a collection of books actually that cover the history of Rome from its founding in the 750s or 760s BCE to the time when Augustus was emperor, which was close to 0 AD, so a period of close to 750 years. So if you've not subscribed, subscribe so that you do not miss any of the videos that I publish. Now, some of the discoveries and inventions that we know that came from Archimedes include the Archimedes principle, sometimes called the Archimedes principle of buoyancy. Now, this is a discovery that he made, we are often told, by accident. That one time he was taking a bath, or he was sitting inside a bowl of water, and he noticed that the more he went into the water, the more water was spilled onto the floor outside the bowl. And he figured that there was a relationship between the volume he was occupying inside the water and the amount of water that was spilled. So that came to be understood to be a very mathematical problem that he solved. And in fact, he in fact figured out that there was a relationship between the volume of the object that goes into the water and the amount that it displaces, and the amount of water that will go out or it will displace, and also the weight of the object that goes into the water and the amount of the water that is displaced. That's the basic idea of the Archimedes principle of buoyancy. Now, that's not the only thing that he discovered or invented. It is also known that he is the one who found a way of approximating the square roots, and also he found out the value of pi. We know pi when it comes to circles, I think, is something all of us have gone through in school, pi over whatever. That's an idea that is attributed to Archimedes. He also found a ways of calculating areas and volumes in general. He's the one who came up with some of the formulas that are commonly used even to date. He also proved that the volume of a sphere is 2/3 of the volume of a circumscribed cylinder. So So he had all these mathematical problems that he either discovered or invented, or formulas we can say. Now, besides maths, I will also say that he was so much into physics, and out of his obsession with physics, he did come up with several inventions, which are going to be very important. This story I'm telling, especially how Livy describes him. Now, one of those is the Archimedes screw. Now, this was a machine that will be used to move water from a borehole, for example, onto the land. And it was when this machine came to being, or when Archimedes invented it, it basically changed how irrigation was done in the ancient world. And this machine spread all over the ancient world because it was so handy and so convenient when it came to irrigating farms, especially from rivers and boreholes where the water is below the land, if you understand what I mean. So moving that water from below up to come to the land is quite a process, especially during those times. Today, at least, we have generators and things like that, and we can just pump the water out. Then they did not have such kind of technology. So this was a technology that changed a lot of things, especially when it came to farming and irrigation in particular. Now, I'll come later to the other inventions that are more relevant to how Livy describes him in his books, or in his book. But I need to mention that from other sources, not from Livy's work, we are told that Archimedes was born in around the year 280s BCE, 287, around there. That's the time he was born. And of course, he was born in Syracuse. Now, Syracuse was one of the many cities that were found in Sicily. And it's important to point out that most of the cities that were found in Sicily and that general part of Italy were Greek cities. They were not Roman. Of course, later on they became Roman when Rome came and conquered that part of the Italian peninsula. But initially they were Greek city-states. So Syracuse was one of those. And Syracuse was a very successful city-state. And this is where Archimedes was born and brought up. And then we are told that when he was around 18, he did leave Syracuse and he went to Egypt, and he did study in the libraries of Alexandria. At that time, Egypt was a very advanced, you can call it civilization, and most of the rest of the world tended to see it as the primary source of knowledge, and the rich will send their kids to Egypt to study. So Archimedes happened to be one of those who left Syracuse and went to Egypt, and he studied there. And once he was done with his education, he came back to Syracuse. There is not much information that he ever left Syracuse, so he basically spent the rest of his life there. Now, Livy mentions Archimedes when he starts telling us about the Romans going to Syracuse to try to conquer it. And here is the context, and I did explain this in my previous video when I was talking about Hiero and his grandson, the king of Syracuse, is that during this time the Punic War was going on. The Romans were fighting the Carthaginians, and the nations that were on the Italian peninsula, and in fact the nations that were to the northern part of Africa, were forced to choose between Rome and Carthage. You either was with Carthage or you were with Rome. So most city-states and most nations found it so difficult during that time because they had to choose one side. They could not choose to be neutral. And Syracuse found itself in that similar situation. So for 60 years that Hiero was the king, Syracuse had aligned itself with Rome. But when he died, his grandson came to power, Hieronymus. Hieronymus chose to align himself with the Carthaginians, with Hannibal. And of course that made Syracuse the enemy of Rome. And so that's the context of what is happening when Livy now tells us of Archimedes. Now the context of telling us of Archimedes also comes from the fact that Archimedes became a critical component of the defense of Syracuse, the military. He wasn't a general himself. In fact, there is no record that he even ever became a soldier. But he was a scientist, an inventor, and he used his skills and knowledge to build machines. And these machines were the ones that were used to defend the city. And in fact, the machines that he invented had never been seen before, and they were so powerful, so efficient. And that's the context in which Livy mentions Archimedes. Now, Livy does tell us that during the reign of Hiero, Archimedes did receive a lot of funds from the king to build machines for war. And that's how Syracuse ended up having these very efficient, very modern, by the standards of those days, war machines. And this is what Livy writes. He says, Hiero had for many years devoted money and pains to fitting up military engines of every kind, guided and directed by the unapproachable skill of Archimedes. And so Hiero did see Archimedes as someone who was very intelligent and very skilled, and he chose to use him. And the way he chose to use him is to spend money on him and give him the capacity to build machines that could be used in war. And these machines seems like they were never used during Hiero's reign, but they became handy when Syracuse was defending itself from the attack of the Romans. So when the Romans come to Syracuse, when Syracuse is now an ally of Carthage, they don't just face soldiers and a wall like it was the case for many other cities. They come to this city and they are facing soldiers, yes, and a wall, but they are also facing new technology and machines that had never been seen in war before. This is what Livy writes about that situation. An assault began so vigorously and would have undoubtedly succeeded had it not been for one man living at the time in Syracuse. That man was Archimedes. Unrivaled as he was as an observer of the heavens and the stars, he was still more wonderful as the inventor and creator of military works and engines, by which with every little trouble he was able to baffle the most laborious efforts of the army. Now, some of these engines included cranes that could drop rocks, huge rocks, from high up to ships on the sea, because Syracuse was just on the edge of the sea. So the ships will come try to attack the city from the sea, and then there were these cranes that could throw huge rocks on them. There were also claws or other types of cranes that could pick the ships and lift them up and throw them back to the water. And there were also machines that would throw wooden missiles at ships and things like that. And we are also told there was this very interesting technology. There were mirrors that will be set in a certain way, and then they will pick the sun rays and then concentrate them in such a way that when directed on a ship, they will make the ship catch fire or burn. So these are some of the technologies that Archimedes had built for the army, and they were so effective because when the Romans came, the Romans could not. Even though the Romans were superpower at that point and the war was going very well for them, in fact at this point Carthage is basically losing the war, the Romans could not breach the security that the people of Syracuse had built with the help of Archimedes. So after trying and failing and losing ships, the Romans decided, you know what, we can't. So what we are going to do, we are going to put up a blockade. So a blockade means we are going to make sure that nobody comes out of the city and nobody goes in, or nothing goes in, no supplies go to the city. That's to make the people inside lack basics or basic supplies, that they are going to be like, you know what, we give up. And that went on for 2 years. And at some point, the people of Syracuse decided, like, yeah, we can't go on like this. And they went and had a conversation with the Roman general. At that time, the Roman general who was leading this assault on Syracuse is a guy who went by the name Marcellus. Now, Marcellus has a conversation with some of the people of Syracuse, and there was a general understanding that they were going to come into the city, basically do a lot of damage. But then something happened. The soldiers go into the city, and then there is a little confusion, and in that confusion, Archimedes is killed by a Roman soldier. We can say that this came out of Archimedes' habit of losing touch with his situational or having low situational awareness, because in some sources say that Archimedes was killed by a soldier because Archimedes was drawing on the ground some of his sketches, and then this soldier comes and the soldier is almost crossing over these sketches, and he tells the soldier, please don't step on my drawings, and somehow the soldier feels insulted by that, and the soldier ends up killing Archimedes. Now, when Archimedes is dead, in fact, Marcellus was very, very disappointed. He was very sad about it. He didn't like it. For the people of Syracuse, this was the last person who was supposed to be killed. And maybe he had even identified him as one person they would have used maybe to get more machines, then to use those machines and fight the Carthaginians. Maybe that's what was in his mind. We'll never know. But what Livy tells us, he wasn't happy about what happened. We are never told. Livy doesn't tell us what happened to that soldier. But this is what he writes. Amongst many horrible instances of fury and rapacity, the fate of Archimedes stands out. It is recorded that amidst all the uproar and terror created by the soldiers who were rushing about the captured city in search of plunder, he was quietly absorbed in some geometrical figures which he had drawn on the sand, and was killed by a soldier who did not know who he was. Roman soldiers were coming into the city, but to him that was not important. What was more important to him was his theories and trying to discover new mathematical formulas. To him, everything else seemed to have been like nonsense going on. So he didn't care what was happening around him. And it was while doing that he ends up offending some Roman soldier, and then he ends up being killed. And then after being killed, of course, as I've mentioned, Marcellus was sad about it, because it seems like he had recognized his brilliance, and maybe there was plans to use him for the war that was still going on. Livy writes, Marcellus was much grieved and took care that his funeral was properly conducted, and after his relations had been discovered, they were honored and protected by the name and memory of Archimedes. So Marcellus makes sure the funeral of Archimedes is well conducted, and he also looks around and he finds his relatives, maybe his family basically, and Livy tells us that this family is honored and then they are given protection because there was so much respect for Archimedes, even from the Romans. Yeah, so if you enjoyed this video, please leave me a like, and also you can leave a comment below and I'll find a moment to reply to those. See you in the next video.